The promise of tomorrow with Cap Young is upon us.
Tonight, it's official. A huge empty army base in the middle of Winnipeg becomes First Nation land.
This is actually going to be our last big friendship box distribution.
And a friendship box project to help kids comes to an end, but because of success.
We're stepping into a whole new era where it's an actual nation-to-nation.
And a New Brunswick community gets tired of having a rundown old school, so they built their own. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Chiefs from Treaty 1 territory in Manitoba met with Canada to sign an agreement ending a nearly 2-decade-long battle over a former army base to create Manitoba's largest urban reserve. Brittany Hobson brings us this.
The land that was once ours has been returned to Treaty 1 nations.
It's been a deal 17 years in the making. The transfer of Capion Barracks to 7 Manitoba First Nations.
The promise of tomorrow with Cap Young is upon us. We have, I think, so much to offer, and we've always given our hearts, our soul to Canada.
The former army base has been vacant since 2004. Since then, the sprawling 64-hectare property has been at the center of an ongoing battle between Treaty 1 First Nations and Canada. Long Plain Chief Dennis Meaches was instrumental in leading that fight.
I can recall the day that the D&D declared this property surplus, and it was myself and former Chief Harvey Nelson. Collectively, we came together and we worked hard to try acquire the land through our treaty land entitlement.
Canada wanted to sell the land, but Meaches, among others, challenged that by saying First Nations had first dibs under the treaty land entitlement. Change came last spring when Canada signed an agreement in principle with the Treaty 1 nations. Minister Jim Carr was on hand for Friday's final signing.
This historic agreement is a result of close collaboration among all of us. And we know that nation-to-nation negotiations can sometimes take time to get right. But we understand their significance.
Broken Head Ojibwe Nation Chief Deborah Smith says the agreement represents endless opportunities for her community.
Today signifies, for me, economic reconciliation.
Meaches agreed, calling the settlement unmatched. Nearly 70% of the land will be transferred to Treaty 1, which will be turned into an urban reserve.
We'll see a lot of huge investment. I think within the next 5 to 15 to 20 years, we'll probably see well up to $2 billion worth of investment, over 2,000 jobs created, opportunities for not only Treaty 1 but other Indigenous people across Manitoba and this country.
The reserve will include commercial development, housing, a sports center, and a war museum. Meaches hopes to see buildings up by the end of 2021. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A First Nation in northern Manitoba is under a state of emergency after the deaths of 4 young people by suicide. In a statement, the chief of God's Lake First Nation said the community has been dealing with an ongoing crisis every day this summer. God's Lake has been dealing with a meth crisis along with addictions to alcohol and drugs. There have also been nearly 24 suicide attempts this summer. Manitoba Kiiwetinawe Okimakanak Grand Chief Garrison says they've called on the Government of Canada to provide proper resources.
The youth in our communities are facing a lot of trauma related to being detached from their culture, and also like not having a place to go and share their stories, share what's happening inside them, and there's no place for them to go to talk and talk about their feelings. And also the lack of mental health care is probably the biggest problem.
Indigenous Services Minister Seamus O'Regan told APTN his staff are in contact with God's Lake officials and MKO to determine what supports the department can offer. Well, this week, the federal and provincial governments joined the Six Nations of the Chilcotin to celebrate the signing of a reconciliation agreement. This comes 5 years after the landmark Supreme Court ruling recognizing Aboriginal title in the area. APTN's Lee Wilson reports from Williams Lake.
The Chilcotin Nation consists of 6 nations along the Chilcotin Highway west of Williams Lake in the interior of British Columbia, with over 1,700 square kilometers of traditional lands. At the Chilcotin Government Building, the Crown, BC Provincial Government, and 6 Nations took a step towards reconciliation. It's something that all parties have been working towards, the Pathway Agreement. Towards it, we are striving. According to Tribal Chair, Chief Joe Alphonse.
Agreement's been in the works pretty much since the time we won Aboriginal title. It's a little over 5 years ago, so right from the very first meeting we had, we laid down, we said we want the exoneration of our 6 war chiefs of 1864 and 65.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau visited the Chilco Lakes in November 2018 for the exoneration of those chiefs that were hanged in 1864 for standing up for their Aboriginal title. Another part of the agreement, housing, where they have had a crisis, with 60% of members living off of reserve.
We laid down that we want 300 homes for our nation. So them coming to terms, the agreement to commit to that, then we're finally ready to sign.
A core part of the agreement is support for self-determination for Chilcotin people who have had a lengthy battle with Tasco Mines, Ltd, over territory where they operate copper and gold mines with potential of 122 drill sites.
To allow ourselves the freedom to generate our own revenue using our natural resources and to have the full benefit of that. We don't want companies coming in here and such as Tasco Mine come in and try to dictate to us and not have any financial compensation.
Chief Alphonse believes that the deal signed on Williams Lake is a pathway to reconciliation and financial benefit to First Nations, with the provincial and federal governments working together across Canada.
You know, right now, Canada and British Columbian industry has been scared to do that. And because of that, they've faced opposition from Indigenous people all up until now, you know, include us. Let us be part of the solution.
Alphonse believes this agreement means independence, hope for his people, for a better future, for education independence.
We, as Indigenous people, we have to believe that as long as we're persistent, we keep moving, and things will eventually turn around, and I think that it's happening.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Williams Lake, British Columbia.
We always want to hear what you think. Here's how you can continue the conversation. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca. You can find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/aptn news. You can also follow APTN News on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for more Indigenous news. Voters in Manitoba are heading to the polls for a provincial election on September 10th. It's now halfway through the campaign, and Indigenous issues seem left out of the discussion. The Southern Chiefs organization represents 34 First Nations in Manitoba. Grand Chief Jerry Daniels joined host Dennis Ward earlier to discuss the upcoming vote.
Grand Chief, thanks for taking some time for us. Do you feel as though First Nations issues are being addressed during this provincial election?
Well, we're taking action on the ground. We've been going into the border crossings to deliver our message and to ensure that Manitobans are aware that First Nations are a priority and they need to be treated as such.
And I guess you'll be taking some of that action again this weekend.
Yeah, so we'll be doing it on Friday as well at 5:30. We've already been at 3 border crossings. This will be the first one, and we'll be at Emerson border this time. Actually, Chief Smith from Brokenhead will also be on Highway 59 doing a unity dance as well. And so we'll have two highways, including the border crossing, slowed down a bit so that people are paying attention to the Indigenous issues.
And for those who don't know, very busy stretches of highway, especially on a long weekend. Why do you think Indigenous issues are being ignored, and what do you think should be part of the discussion?
Well, I think this is really about Pallister, this election, and his credibility and whether or not he's actually delivering on creating better quality of life for our people. The main issue that's valuable to Manitobans is health. It's always been health as the primary area that affects all of us. And so we echo the concerns of many of the mainstream politicians and leaders and nurses and unions that are all kind of, looking at health and whether or not health is actually improving. I think the biggest challenge in having that discussion is, well, what opinion is valid? Where are the the assertions that Pallister makes or anybody makes around health truly verified? How do we verify that and whether or not it's improving or not improving? Because from what we're hearing from people who are involved in health, that it's not improving, and it's for First Nations leaders, we really haven't had the government, at least the provincial government, reach out in any meaningful way to partner and to look at how we can deliver better health in the province.
As you may know, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs took the rare step of endorsing Wab Kinew and the NDP. Are the Southern Chiefs organization planning to endorse a party or a leader here in Manitoba?
We haven't had any conversations about endorsing any of the party leaders or any of the parties themselves. Our position as it stands right now is to ensure that policy and priorities around First Nations are being emphasized and included in the discussion. And what we've had happen is an attack on our hunting rights, our fishing rights. We've had exclusion from the infrastructure investments. We're not considered a partner. We're merely people to be consulted, and we need to be included as genuine partners. And second, that our economic development corps have been really been robbed, where we have a provincial government and Pallister mainly, who's been digging into the pockets of our communities and taking to the tune of $340,000 a year from some of our communities.
Grand Chief Daniels, we'll have to leave it there, but appreciate you taking some time for us.
Thank you.
Well, we need to take a commercial break, but coming up, a new school that will serve the entire community, not just students. First, here's tomorrow's weather forecast. Off to the east coast, we've got 23 in cloud in St. John's, 22 in rain in Halifax, 19 in rain in Happy Valley Goose Bay, 13 in cloud in Kujwak, 14 in rain in Shibugmu, Rouyn-Noranda, 17 sunshine, 20 in Sault Ste. Marie and North Bay, 22 in sunny in Peterborough. Big Trout Lake is raining in 16, 20 in rain in Thunder Bay, 10 in sunshine in Churchill, 20 and rain in God's Lake, 21 and rain in Gimli, 22 and rain in Winnipeg, 22 in sunshine in Saskatoon, 24 and sunny in Swift Current. Lots of cloud in the north, 17 in cloudy in Buffalo Narrows, and 18 in La Ronge, 20 in Meadow Lake. Welcome back. A Mi'kmaq community is getting a new school, and it will be more than classrooms and books. It's also a place for the entire community. Angel Moore reports.
The school in Elsipogtog looks like any other school, but it's getting worn out, and it's too small for the growing community, so they're building a new one. Chief Aaron Sauk says the community will contribute to the children's education.
We're stepping away from the usual approach from the Government of Canada, and we're stepping into a whole new era where it's an actual nation-to-nation.
The design is influenced by the medicine wheel. It has a lot of windows, open spaces, and natural materials. Director of Education, Ivan Augustine, says the design will be more welcoming to parents and elders.
We want to make it a community-friendly because a lot of people from our communities and other First Nation communities have residential school experience. So they're kind of intimidated by school.
The new school will be large enough for about 600 students. It will have a library, computer room, kitchen, lunchroom, and a gymnasium. It is expected to open in 2021. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Elsipogtog First Nation.
New school, new year, new dean. Lakehead University in Thunder Bay is welcoming a new dean of law. Willow Fiddler has that story.
Lakehead University announced its new dean of law this week. Dr. Eula Hughes is a law professor from the University of New Brunswick. She said Lakehead is a leader in Canada for opening a law school in the north.
We're facing the same issues over and over again, right? We're facing the issue of inadequate recognition of Indigenous legal tradition. We're facing students still coming out of law school not knowing very much about Aboriginal people. They don't know very much about Indigenous law, about Aboriginal law.
Lakehead started searching for a new dean last year after Angelique Eaglewoman resigned. She sued the university, claiming she was the victim of systemic discrimination. Her appointment in 2016 was a big deal. She was the first Indigenous dean of a Canadian law school. A longtime professor in Lakehead's Indigenous Learning Department, Dennis McPherson holds a law degree and has applied for the position twice now. He said he's disappointed but not surprised the university is upholding the status quo by hiring a non-Indigenous dean.
Like I say, and it comes back to the lived experience. It doesn't have to be me. It could be somebody else. Okay? But what an Indigenous person would bring into it is a different perspective.
Senator Murray Sinclair offered his support to Hughes in a statement. The former Truth and Reconciliation Commission chair said Hughes brings a wealth of legal and academic experience and sees this as an important step as we live in a country where several legal systems operate simultaneously, including Indigenous legal traditions. Hughes said recruiting Indigenous faculty will be a big focus.
Making sure that this is a good environment for students to learn and a good environment for faculty to work is important to just concentrate on, focus on, and bringing new people in. And I think a lot of the expertise on Indigenous law continues to reside in the community much more than in the academic environment.
Regardless of criticisms, Hughes said she's dedicated to giving it her best effort.
And I think it's going to be for the community to decide whether this was something that worked for them or not, right? That's, I think the jury will have to be out on that for a little while. We'll just have to see.
Willow Fiddler, APTN National News, Thunder Bay.
APTN turns 20. We're going to look back on our early days when we come back, and here's the rest of tomorrow's weather. In northern Alberta, we've got lots of cloud, 13 and cloudy in Fort Chip, 17 and rain in Fort McMurray. Rain and 16 in Edmonton, 26, lots of sunshine in Lethbridge. Tofino's raining and 17, 23 and rain in Vancouver. 18 and sunshine in Fort Nelson, 23 and sunshine in Smithers. Dawson City is 19 and sunshine, Mayo's 20 and sunny. Norman Wells is sunshine and 13, Watee is 10 and 11 and sunny in Yellowknife. Sunshine in Colville Lake and 8 degrees. Nuvik is mostly sunny and 9. 1 and some snow in Cambridge Bay, 6 mix of sun and cloud in Baker Lake. Repulse Bay is rainy and 6. Arctic Bay is 8 and cloud. Holyoke is 5 and rain. Goya Haven looks like some snow and 2 degrees. Welcome back. An Algonquin community 3 hours northwest of Ottawa was given some royal treatment this week. Rapid Lake First Nation was the site of a grand finale for a few initiatives. Here's Annette Francis with more.
It's a bittersweet day for the president of I Love First Peoples.
Today is actually going to be our last big Friendship Box distribution.
This is where a Friendship Box initiative kicked off 6 years ago. Over the years, hundreds of children who attended the Kittigamik Elementary School have been gifted with little shoe boxes like this, filled with special gifts with messages of hope and love.
While we are going to stay connected with the kids and run workshops and different things, we just don't feel that the Friendship Box initiative is still needed in the school, and that's happy news. You know, the community is doing really well, and we're very proud to see that.
While today marks the grand finale for the Friendship Box initiative in this community, it is also the final screening of the movie The Grizzlies.
Last year we toured the movie Indian Horse to 40 remote communities, and this year we were asked to tour the Grizzlies movie. It was a great opportunity this year to talk about something different, to raise the issue of suicide, especially amongst the youth in the communities. It's been a very powerful and moving time as we bring people together from communities across Canada.
The film is based on a true story of Inuit youth that embraced the game of lacrosse to break away from the legacy of suicide and addictions in their community. Award-winning Inuit hip-hop artist Hyper T has had the opportunity to join the tour. He says it's been an unforgettable and important tour.
Sharing the stories with the kids that it's okay to go to counseling, it's okay to feel depression, it's okay to feel these bad emotions that you feel inside, because at the end of the day, like we all feel them, and we may feel alone at one point, but it's about trying to figure out how to cope with those emotions in a healthy way, instead of just going into like substance abuse and something that we see too often in our communities.
Principal Shirley White Duck appreciates all the time they've spent visiting the community.
It's a happy day, but also a sad day, because it's the 6th year that I've been working with José Lusignan with I Love First Peoples, and to know that it's the end is a little bit heartbreaking as well, but I'm hoping that we can stay connected and maybe she can come up once a year.
According to Lusignan, a new I Love First Peoples campaign will be launched this fall. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Rapid Lake, Quebec.
20 years ago, in 1999, APTN began broadcasting. We started with a weekly show, Vision News. It was the first time a newscast dedicated to First Nation, Métis, and Inuit issues ever aired on Canadian television. One of the original hosts, Rick Harp, sat down with the first news director, Dan David, to reminisce about the early days and talk about how Indigenous news has evolved over the past 2 decades.
You know, Dan, you recently told me that APTN was always this weird, distant dream, until it wasn't. And even when we did launch, you know, the naysayers out there told us, well, how long are you going to last? Despite getting past the first hurdle, they were right there to talk about, ready to tell us we're not going to succeed, we're not going to endure. And it's 20 years in, and you know, literally a generation. You're going to share a letter with us in about 35 seconds, but I want you to just channel that idea that it's been a generation of Indigenous television.
I mean, just hearing the voices of Greg Taylor, Maureen Gugu, and other people, you know, the whole idea was to take a whole bunch of people who had never worked in television before, train them, get them out there, and then maybe inflict them on the industry. And like a virus, and start spreading around, so that, you know, that generational thing, that we evolve when we begin to infect the news industry in general. I think it's a great idea. I think it's working too.
You can catch the full special this Sunday, September 1st at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Well, that's all the news I have for this final Friday of August. Don't forget to download the APTN News app if you haven't already. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Have a wonderful long weekend. We'll see you back here tomorrow.